Cool. Good afternoon, everyone. Cheers for coming along. Today I'm here to talk to you about SVG. So for those of you who have never met me, my name's Rob. I've been at Box for about 2 years now as a developer. And basically this is a first talk of many, hopefully, that I want to do. So let's get cracking. If we take a standard website, for example, this BBC one, yeah, sorry about the morbid content, it was when I took the picture. Just ignore that. But yeah, so on a typical website, you've got text, pictures, and videos if you're lucky. But what you might not have noticed is also you have these symbols around. So you've got like, the BBC logo is a symbol, those weather icons, and the arrows as well. They're all symbols. Now, in the past, what we used to do was we used to just make a JPEG or a PNG out of it, stick it in an image tag, and that was it really. It worked fine. And that was, what we all used to do back in 2005, all the way up to sort of 2006, 2008. And this worked great up until the point when we started viewing websites on like our TV, a phone, maybe our tablet. And all of these devices, they had different like specifications. So like your TV might have like 4,000 pixels, whereas a 90s CRT monitor probably only has like 1,000. So yeah, there's a huge difference between the two. So like what happens to our icons when we view it on like a high definition screen versus a standard definition screen? Does it like shrink or something? So if we take like this picture of a cat, I chose it because he's got a beanie and I like beanies, so pretty cool. Yeah, and he's wearing glasses as well, so he must be a hipster. So, right, hang on, I'll go back a sec. So that image is 400 by 300 pixels. If we put it on a 800 by 600 screen, we could fit 4 of those on, because you've got 400 along, and then another 400, then 300, 300. So we can get 4 kittens on there. Now if we move on to 1600 by 1200, that's now a 16th of the size, so we can fit on 16 kittens. But as you notice, if that screen is the same size, our kitten is getting smaller and smaller. But that's not what we see in real life. Because you don't see like people with a brand new iMac 4K, 5K, iMac 5K, sorry, with like a little magnifying glass going, I can't really read this because it's so tiny. So what happens is, and this is something I learned when researching this, is CSS pixels are not actually device pixels. In fact, the whole concept of a pixel is actually relative, which kind of messes up everything, because so if you've looked at the specification like centimeters and meters and stuff like that, points, they're all relative to each other. So they're based off one another. And to find out that pixels, which used to be, in my head, the base term, is also relative. Yeah, it's kind of like, oh God, what's going on? So basically, the whole concept is, and this is quite tricky to get your head around, it took me about a month to get my head around this properly, but if you imagine an old monitor, it's 96 dpi roughly, which basically means if you've got a square inch section of your screen, you've got 96 pixels in that square section. So what W3C have done in CSS 2.1 is say, so if I'm using this monitor, which was like a standard monitor a couple of years ago, at an arm's length, and let's take the angle of that, then that's how big our pixel is going to be. It's easier to display with this diagram here. So you've got a viewer, and depending on how far away he is, the pixel gets bigger or smaller. So on a TV, it's going to be a lot bigger than a phone. So when you say something is 400 pixels, you're actually saying it's 400 reference pixels. But of course, it's possible that a device has got greater pixel density than 96. And for that reason, every device has hard-coded in it a device pixel ratio. It's actually got a number that says how many pixels it's got in that square inch. And to make life easy, because you can't split half pixels, you've got to decide between one or the other. Device manufacturers, they go up in multiples. So they'll go 1 times, 2 times, 3 times. So like your iPhone will be a 2 times device. It will have twice as many pixels in the same area as a standard monitor. So what happens to our beautiful kitten for that on a high definition screen? Well, on 1 times displays as it's always done. So in here we've got diagram, and the squares represent the device's pixels and the circles represent the image that you're trying to display. Now, our image is 400 by 300, and if we just display that again, trying to take up the same amount of space, because that image doesn't have the same amount of detail, the browser doesn't know what to do. It doesn't have that information. So it just copies those pixels. So even though you've got this beautiful high-resolution display, you're still displaying up low-resolution imagery. So it's going to look blurry. It's going to look just awful. So what we can do, and what we've been doing for a while, is we use CSS to help us out with this. And what we can do is we can create a media block which basically says, run these styles inside this section here if the device pixel ratio is greater than 2. So a common usage is, if we've got like a box, we can set a background URL, box.png, and that will be the standard size. And then we'll have a higher resolution version in this media query, which basically loads something that's twice as big, so it will be like an 800 by 600 image, if we're using that cat analogy again. And then we'll shrink it down. So we'll shrink it down with background size. Now, the browser's then going, okay, well, I need to fill this amount of space, but I've got all of this detail still to use, so I might as well use that. And so we end up with something like this, where there's no doubling up anymore. It's actually rendering it as is. And so the image in the end will look a lot sharper because of that. Of course, with each ratio, you've got to create another asset. You could offer just the largest one and then just sort of make everyone else deal with it, but imagine like loading this really, really massive image on your phone. It'll take forever. So what we do is we'll tend to load several images, or make several images. And this can be a bit of a pain because you might have 100 images. If you've got to save 3 different versions of it, and then if you change it, you've got to then save them all over again. It's just a huge, huge pain. And it gets even worse when you've got like a sprite, like Amazon's sprite is massive. And if you've got several different versions of that, then at 7 different sizes, and then you've got to play around with like the background position and all of that. It's just absolute nightmare. But luckily there's a way out of this. We can use vectors instead. So to explain what a vector is, it's best to explain what the difference is between images and vectors. So an image is typically known as a rasterized image. And what that means is basically all of the pixels are hard-coded. So as you can see here, we've got sort of a couple of white pixels and then some blue ones. All of those are hard-coded into the file. If you make it bigger, it's just going to duplicate those pixels. It can't get any more detail than that. Whereas a vector just stores coordinates. And it might sound familiar to you. I don't know if it will or not, but when I was at school, there was a program called Logo. I don't know if anyone's heard of Logo. But for those who haven't, basically you're this turtle. You start in the middle of the page, and then you give it commands. So you could say, okay, go forward 50 pixels, and this little turtle will basically move forward. And behind it, it will draw a little line for some reason. I don't know why, it just makes it easier. And then you can tell it to turn right 90 degrees, and then go forward again. And eventually you end up with a square. And that's exactly what a computer does when it's reading a vectorized image. It just follows the coordinates until it finishes. And SVG is a vector image. In fact, the V stands for vector. Now, SVG isn't new. It was invented by the W3C in 1999, so it's yonks old. I was still at school, actually. Yeah. Primary school, actually. Thanks. It's XML, unfortunately, but I don't know how you could do it in JSON, but you know, we can try. But yeah, so it's XML, it's basically like HTML, dead simple. It will look great on all of these devices. It will look perfectly sharp because the computer's generating the image. And it'll even look great on this watch if you happen to get one. And it's also tiny. Here are two owls. They're both exactly the same. As you can see, PNG is 27 kilobytes, whereas the SVG is only 2. And that's because it's all coordinates, so it's all text, and it will be compressed down and gzipped and all of that. So it ends up really, really small. And also good news is that because it's been around for a while, the support on the browsers is really good. Apart from usual suspects, which is like IE8, Android browser, which just, yeah. But there's fallbacks for that, so it's fine. So you may be wondering how you can get your own. Well, the first method is, because it's XML, you could actually learn it if you really wanted to. I wouldn't recommend it, but you could if you want. Imagine trying to do that with like a PNG, like doing these weird little graphics that, I don't know if you've ever opened up a PNG, but it looks crazy. And yeah, you've got all these, like, inside your SVG, you've got all of these elements that you can use. So you can create a rectangle by just doing rect, and then decide how big you want it, width and height, and there's your rectangle. Out of all of those, the one you'll probably come across the most is probably the path one, because that's what most complex shapes are built with. The path one basically lets you define coordinates like that logo demonstration earlier. A better idea is to use a program, an actual program for it, such as Illustrator, which I think is like $20 a month or something like that. But there's also some great apps like Affinity Designer, Sketch, and there's a couple of free ones as well, but I can't remember the name of them. Inkscape, that's it. And also you can download stock SVG from stock sites like iStock and Shutterstock. There's like, they've even got like little toggles to put down what kind of image you want, and there's a vector one. So you just tick that, and then it will just give you a load of vector images. They're okay, but you know, stock imagery. And also there's Icon Moon. I've actually used this for my site. I used it for like a Twitter logo and Facebook and stuff like that. Basically, you pick what icons you want, and then there's like a little download button at the bottom, and what it'll do is it'll take the ones you picked, compress them all into one SVG, give you an example of how to use them, and then just download it to you in a zip. So, pretty awesome. So you may be wondering how you can use it. Well, it's as simple as just replacing whatever your PNG was in that image tag with owl.svg. Or if you're using CSS, you can just do the same thing with a background image. Replace the URL with owl.svg, and away you go. And because it's a vector, it's infinitely scalable. So you could, if you wanted to, you could set it to the body, put an owl on it, and set the background size to cover so it covers the entire screen. And then, you know, whether you're viewing it on a 50-inch monitor or a Game Boy, you could get a nice little owl. So, yeah, it's pretty cool. Now, the other method is inline, which is basically putting it like you would a paragraph or a section or, you know, a div, that kind of thing. Putting it in the HTML. Now, it seems a bit lame on the surface because, like, why would you use it? You'd want to separate out your images into their own files. But this is actually a really powerful method. Because it's inline and part of the HTML, it's actually part of the DOM, which means that you can style it with CSS. And that's actually really, really powerful. And also, there's one less HTTP request. And you may be wondering also, what about sprites? Like, you know, we used to put all our images into sprites. So, can we do that with SVG? Well, sure we can. If we start off with our SVG block, and we add our SVGs. Here I've got, imagine like two different pictures or icons. and then we wrap them in symbols. So top one I've wrapped the symbol, I've called it owl, and the bottom one I've called pussycat, because that's what those paths could be, maybe. They're not, but they could be. And finally, you set the width and height to 0, because it could be, some browsers are a bit weird and they treat it like an iframe. I don't know if you've had an empty iframe, but sometimes it does like weird things with the layout. So if you set it to 0 and height and width, then it just makes it nothing, and that will stop any like weird display issues. So you've defined your SVG, you've got your owl and your pussycat. How do you display it on the screen? Well, you simply add another SVG block where you want it, and then inside that you add this use statement, and then inside that you add an attribute with xlink href hash owl. Now hash owl stands for the ID of the symbol that you've just created. In fact, you can go one step further. You could actually separate out that SVG sprite into its own file, and then you get browser caching just thrown in for free. Problem is IE, as always. In fact, this is really bad because even IE 11 doesn't work, like none of them. It's shocking, but that's how it is. Luckily, there's a fallback for that called SVG for everyone. And what this does is, if it doesn't support it, it takes that SVG file, loads it in via Ajax, and then just sticks it in the top of the page. So it's kind of the same thing, but it doesn't really work as well because you lose browser caching and stuff like that. So, and as I mentioned, CSS manipulation because it's part of the DOM, you can manipulate it with CSS. So I will demonstrate this by using this iconic library if I can get it up. Hang on. No. There we go. Okay, I'm not sure how well this is going to work because frame rate's a bit rubbish. But. So this is basically like Bootstrap, but it's just a collection of SVG icons. The reason why I'm showing you this is because it's got the best online examples of the power that inline SVG has, and they make full use of it. So, for example, here we've got a camera. Or we had a camera. And you can actually add a class to every single part of it. So you could, like, if you wanted to make your body of your camera black, then you can do, but just by targeting that in your CSS. Or if you want to be like a bit more crazy, you can make it orange, yellow, whatever. Maybe you want like a bright green lens, you could do that just by targeting that CSS class. And that means that you can make all sorts of different styles of icons just by using CSS. You don't even have to touch Photoshop or Illustrator or anything like that. So if you wanted multicolour, you can do that. Or maybe you don't like colours and you just want them one colour. You can do that as well. Or maybe you're quite partial to wrapping everything in a box. Then you can do that as well. You can rotate it using CSS rotates. And also what's really cool is you can offer multiple levels of detail. So for instance here we've got 3 different magnifying glasses, each one getting a bit more detailed. Now the idea behind this is that when you make them their actual size, each icon is very clear, because there's no point putting loads of detail into an icon if it's going to be 16 pixels, because nobody's going to see it. And that's also really cool because on a responsive site, you can have a really simple icon when it's on a mobile device, and then as you get more, go up the device chain, so not laptops, tablets, and then maybe TVs, that kind of thing, you can offer a different icon. So that's really cool stuff. Don't know why I didn't do that in the first place. And this is all inline SVG. You know, there's no like special libraries or anything like that. It's just SVG. So you may be wondering also, you know, you don't want to do this manually every time. It's a bit of a pain. Are there any build tools? Well, yes, there are. Oh no. Okay, yeah, we're back. Cool. It's like it never happened. Right, yeah, so basically we've got two different Grunt and Gulp plugins. They're both just as good as each other. There's no verses between them. They both do the same thing. And what they do is they take a folder full of SVG and they put it into one. They just compress it all into one using the method I spoke about earlier. So that's pretty cool. And then you can just use it in your site. Unfortunately, not all SVG is created equal, and some can contain a lot of fluff in them. Now, what I mean by fluff is they can add, like if you save it in Illustrator, it will add like a meta tag that says saved in Illustrator for some reason. I don't know, a bit of advertising maybe. And also they'll make like the paths really detailed, but they don't need to be that detailed. They might put like spare white space around. So to get rid of that, we can use a tool called SVGO or SVGgo. I don't know how you say it, but that. And that basically removes all of the white space. It gets rid of any of the like marketing meta tags and any extra fluff that's associated with it. So that's pretty cool. But you know, if that's not your bag, you know, the command line's not for you, then there's a tool that's been written by Rob's old boss, actually, Jake Archibald. Just some dude. So that basically is exactly the same thing. It actually uses SVGO in the background, but you can just copy and paste your SVG, stick it on there, play around with the toggles, see what you like, and then download it. And it also shows you how much you're saving, which is quite nice. This is all good, but there's an elephant in the room, unfortunately. He's brought bling. IE8 doesn't support it at all. There's no polyfills or anything like that. You just can't support it. So what does a dev do? Well, the first option is, does it really matter if you've not got an icon there? Like, you know, if you've got a button that says create and then you've got like a little pencil, does it really matter that the pencil's gone for a small subset of users? I don't know. It's up to you to make that decision, but personally that's the one I would opt for first. If you're using it in CSS though, you're in luck because you can just pass multiple background images. And so what the browser will do is if it doesn't understand SVG, it will just go and then grab the PNG and go, yeah, okay, I can display that. Keeps opening links. Come on. Right, okay, yeah. So you may be wondering, like, you know, okay, we've got our PNG fallback for the CSS, but it'd be a bit of a bummer if you had to go through and save all these SVGs again into PNG, because like that's the whole reason why we're going to SVG, is to like save time, make a better product. So there's this tool, SVG to PNG converter, which basically takes all the SVGs, that folder again, and uses Phantom.js to create a PNG fallback. So it will literally just look at those SVGs and resave them as PNGs, which is pretty awesome. So you can use them in your CSS.
Sorry, you use Phantom.js to do that?
Yeah.
Phantom.js, the headless browser.
Yeah, it uses the
Yep.
co-rendering engine to...
Because it has to render it.
Yeah. It's clever. I don't know how it works, but it's clever. Yeah, there's a lot of crazy stuff. Anyway, so also you've got another option is you've got SVG Easy, and this will basically search the markup for any mentions of .svg and replace it with .png, which can be useful. There's a load of other techniques that people have used, like using switch blocks and stuff like that. They all have their pros and cons, but those are the three that I picked out, which are quite nice. So what about accessibility? So let's take our SVG sprite again. So we've got RL, but it's not really very descriptive. I mean, you know, we don't have an alt tag or anything like that. All we've got really is just the ID, which says it's an owl, but it doesn't really tell it like what colour feathers it's got or anything like that. So what we can do is we can add a title, which says this is an owl. Maybe a description that says, you know, it's got brown, it's got big eyes. And maybe the owl's learnt how to speak. So we can also add a text element. Now this text element is actually really cool because when you add it, you can add it anywhere on your graphic and you can select it. The browser will be able to select that text and you can copy that and things like that. So imagine like a screen reader could actually read that text out as well as the title and description in the right order. I don't know how you would do that with PNG or any other image format. And there's a fantastic article on SitePoint for other methods for creating SVG, accessible SVG. She's done a great list. There's about 8 points. I picked out 3 of them, 3 of the most important ones, but definitely worth a read. SVG can also be animated. So if I show you this, somehow. This might not actually work as well because I'm screen recording, but usually that's really fluid on a. It's not so bad, but it's a bit jumpy. But usually it's it's 60 frames per second. But you can do lots of like cool little animations. This is just SVG text element, and you can do some really nice animations out of that. I've just lost my slide. Oh, I bet it's on here. Bear with me a sec. Technical difficulties. I can't get bothered. Right, okay. Cool. There's 3 methods of animation. You can use SMIL or Smile. I don't really know much about that, but there's like a lot of information on the internet, but I don't really understand it yet. You can use CSS keyframes, which is standard. Like if you're animating anything else, you just do it exactly the same way. Set your breakpoints at percentages, and you can target individual SVG elements with that. Or you could use JavaScript, such as like there's a library called snap.svg, which is also pretty cool. Filters as well. Filters are basically let you do like a blur on your SVG. So you could do like a Photoshop Gaussian blur. I won't show you the demo of it, but if you want to come around, some people have done some really awesome things with it, where they've blurred it and then they've sort of alphaized the blur, which basically makes it the same color again. And it makes like this cool little blobule effect. And then they've done like loading spinners and things like that. It's really quite nice. This is all very well and good, but what do we do with our photos? We still need photos. Unfortunately, we're going to need to still create multiple versions for multiple screens. There's no way of getting around that because it's hard-coded. But luckily, there's a couple of like elements coming out soon. There's like the picture element, which I won't touch on now. I think Tom's doing a talk on it soon. Sorry, Tom, dropped you in it there. But the image tag, this one I want to talk about because the image tag is getting a new attribute called sourceSet. Now, what sourceSet does is you basically put in all of your images that you've got created. You put in the sizes, and then the browser will pick which one it thinks is best to use. Now, it sounds pretty basic, but imagine the browser could then take into account the user's broadband connection, whether it's slow or fast. It could also offer the option to the user to say, do you want high-resolution images or not? So that's really cool. I'm really looking forward to that coming out. And that's it, really. I hope I've inspired you to check out SVG. It's really cool. There's so much on it. Definitely play around with it. And yeah, thanks everyone for coming. Any questions?
Is it rendered quickly? All the work that it has to do, is this the kind of thing that just rolls off the browser back these days?
Yeah, it just goes straight for the GPU. It's done. Seconds. Milliseconds even. So, yeah, 0.00001. Yeah. Yeah. I've been using it on my site for the past year, or 2 years, I think, so no problems. So,
Rob, do you understand VBox yet?
ViewBox, it's a nightmare. But yes, vaguely.
Can you explain VBox?
No. I nearly put it in the talk and I was like, no, because this is going to make it complicated. It's,
It's impossible to understand.
that'll be in Tom's talk next week.
I thought it was a joke talk. I thought you were on
Oh, Steph.
So there's this conference we called SSL Conf.
There's a ninja running it.
Oh, yeah. Is that ninja called Steph?
Could be. You never know. It's a ninja. Be a rubbish ninja.
Any further questions?
We get quite a lot of design through as PSDs generally. Are there simple ways to convert from stuff like PSD through to SVGs?
It depends on how they've done the PSD. So Photoshop comes with both vector and raster imagery, and depending on how they've done the particular graphic you want to get out of, you can sometimes, if it's a vector, you can literally just export it, and then that's it. You've got your SVG file. You can just use it wherever you want. If it's a raster, you might be out of luck on that one, unfortunately.
Photoshop has a bad habit that if you export direct to SVG image, it is technically an SVG, it's got the SVG tag, but inside of it, it's referencing the PNG. So it's not actually XML.
The best thing is to copy from Photoshop into Illustrator and then export from Illustrator.
Yeah.
Yeah. Otherwise, you just get crazy markup from Photoshop. There's no way.
Yeah.
The best thing is to actually create everything in Illustrator
Yeah.
and then it has a smart object in Photoshop and then just when you click it in Photoshop, it automatically open into Illustrator and you can save it like that.
Mm.
It has the best way.
Okay, design.
Yeah.
It's something that would be really useful for like CW, because especially like when they were doing the cap, and they sent us those PSDs, it would have been pretty cool to be able to.
So where are we using it here?
RCN, yeah.
Just those.
Yes.
What would stop us from doing it in the future? Is it a decision we would make or a decision the client would make?
Run support.
IE8. If you have to support IE8, then you have to
It's not
put
worth
in
it for us
so
to
much.
It's not worth the effort?
Well, it depends.
Wow,
I mean, the
it's
fallbacks, you can't do it. It's the IEA, it just doesn't work. So.
Well, the SVG doesn't work, but
If
the
it's-
fallbacks,
if it's
how much
inside-
overhead?
Well, as Rob said, you can automatically convert SVGs to PNG, so and there are tools that you can run that would then change the markup in page to PNG references instead of SVG.
Given all the pipeline processing we do on things now, it's not like the old days when you're writing JavaScript clear on the site. Is there anything in place that would say, here's my SVG, I want it on this page, but automatically create the fallback stuff and automatically convert it into formats? Do we know if that exists?
Yeah, that was one of the things in there.
So, that's what Delta was, right?
One
Oh, pay attention.
I just. I just turned off screen recording, so it should go a lot quicker. Still, I don't know if you can hear that, but my Mac's not happy at all. Okay, I'm going to be brief. Ooh, that's not good.
Is that an SVG animation?
That is not. That's HDMI actually. But like this globule thing is, yeah, you can. It's got like little cool little globules, and that's all SVG. Like that's not even canvas or anything like that. It's just SVG.
We're totally doing that on page.
Why don't we make that stuff like that?
Rob, I was on this exact website and I didn't know the answer.
You've also got like, this is one I want to do for my site.
That just looks like some sort of really disturbing spider.
It's like,
It looks like the inside of my mind.
did you ever watch?
Your mind was less stable than that.
Did you ever watch?
The first and fashion side.
Did you ever watch The Queen's Nose, Rob?
Yeah.
It's basically that effect, 'cause if I change the image, it'll do that. It's like a little prismy thing.
Like telephone exchange in there.
That's what you think.
Because one thing that's cool with SVG is you can define an SVG filter inline and then apply it with CSS to a non-SVG element.
Yeah.
So you can define like a Gaussian for SVG and then actually apply it to a div or to some other part of the page.
Years ago, I used to do black and white images like that, and then making them go from black and white to colour using an SVG filter. It's really nice because it's supported on more rows and CSS images.
Yeah, it's really nice and it's very interoperable with everything.
Yeah, it's all very snazzy. But the main thing is it just renders sharp. That's the main thing. This stuff is just cool little bits.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's the fact that it scales down I like as well.
Mm.
So it's not just that, oh, it works on big.
Yeah. Well, you can scale down PNGs, so that's fine. It'll just lose detail.
But it's not.
But it won't. It will blur it a little bit because it will try to do like the half pixel thing and everything like that. But
Also great for controls on mobile devices because with the latest iPhone phones you've got 3 times, you've got not the 2 times, you've got the 1 times sizes as well. Rather than having to keep all those assets in your project, you just have the SVG and screen output, whatever.
well, thanks everyone for coming. It's nice to have you here.